You've probably heard this argument before. For years now, people have been encouraging black creators to tell their own stories and build their own narratives, craft the world they want to be a part of, and find an audience that resonates with your vision. On the surface, most people assume this is just about representation and visibility, about seeing black faces in media. But for me, it goes much deeper than that. This is about control. It's about legacy. It's about who owns black presence in fiction, in imagination, and in culture as a whole, and more importantly, investing in it for mass production. Let me give you an example. Recently, I've been seeing a lot of content creators pointing out how DC Comics and Marvel suddenly remembered that they have black characters. DC in particular was almost comedic about it. Right before Black History Month, they brought back Static, one of their most beloved black comic book character. Predictably, this rubbed a lot of black comic book fans the wrong way. People started asking the obvious question, why do these corporations only seem to care about promoting black characters during February? And honestly, I couldn't help but laugh a little, because this is exactly why I've always advocated for black creators supporting black created work. When you don't own the characters, you don't control when they matter. You don't control how they're used. You don't control whether they're treated as meaningful protagonists or as seasonal marketing tools. And 8 times out of 10, those black characters sit in a corporate cabinet for most of the year, only to be dusted off when February rolls around and the company feels the need to signal inclusivity. Once the month is over, they quietly fade back into the background. This includes black-washed characters. On paper, you'd think it's making an impact, but in reality, it is detrimental. You're seeing more black characters appearing in various media, but that isn't strengthening our control of black fiction. If we truly want control over our image, our stories, and our future in fiction, then creating our own worlds isn't optional, it's necessary. Because without ownership, representation will always be conditional, temporary, and disposable. When you rely on other groups to include you in their worlds, you are always at their mercy. And when a black character created by someone else becomes popular, profitable, and widely loved, the wealth, influence, and creative power generated by that character flows right back to people who may never create another black character ever again. It doesn't circulate back into black creative ecosystems, it doesn't meaningfully benefit black creators or consumers, and it doesn't build any kind of sustainable foundation. What you end up with is a group of people desperate for representation, but with no stake in the systems that profit from that representation. This is especially true with manga and anime. I've already made a separate video explaining why you don't see much racial diversity in Japanese manga and why a certain excuse was stupid, so I won't rehash that entire argument here. But despite that reality, you constantly see black anime and manga fans hoping, sometimes begging, that Japanese creators will one day create more black anime and manga characters. And I understand why. People love the art style, they love the tropes, they love the worlds that manga creates, and they want to see themselves reflected in that aesthetic. And yet, despite all of this, you'll be hard-pressed to convince some black people to support the people who are creating the quote-unquote representation they want. This led me to a hypothesis. I don't think representation itself is the primary problem anymore. This might sound controversial, but sometimes, when I see some black people calling for more diversity at this point in time, it doesn't feel like they're asking for genuine diversity, visibility, or creative expansion. What it feels like, at least to me, is that they're asking to be validated by white creators, or by Japanese creators in the case of manga, or by institutions that historically have never centered them. They want to be chosen, they want to be acknowledged and affirmed by those outside the community. It genuinely feels like they care more about the proximity to these groups. It sounds harsh when said out loud, but that's genuinely how it comes across, because if people truly wanted diversity, they would have already found it. It exists. It just isn't being amplified or supported at the same level. Of course, I gotta put my money where my mouth is, and decided to see just how difficult it is to find works of fiction with the diversity my people seem to desire. This is what I was able to find in 1 hour of searching online. As you just saw, I showcased 50 different works of fiction that were created by black, or broadly, dark-skinned creators. And the most important thing to understand here is that I didn't need special access, insider knowledge, or some exclusive network to find these projects. I found them by simply looking, by browsing, by being intentional about discovery. And that's why I've come to the conclusion that the problem isn't really a lack of diversity in fiction itself. The problem is a lack of visibility, a lack of support, and, more importantly, a lack of willingness to engage with the diverse work that already exists. There is no shortage of imagination, creativity, or talent coming from black creators. What's missing is the collective push to uplift, circulate, and normalize that work within mainstream conversations. It also raises a deeper question: what kind of representation are people actually asking for? Because if representation simply means seeing black faces in familiar, pre-approved franchises, then that's not really about storytelling. It's about validation from existing power structures. It's about waiting to be acknowledged rather than building something of our own. As I mentioned earlier, I've noticed that some black audiences who constantly call for diversity tend to hold black created works to a much harsher standard. I am not advocating for anyone to consume mediocrity, but I've seen how people are more willing to be lenient to other people's group's work, but suddenly expected god-tier level of work from their own racial group. They're often more than willing to excuse mediocrity, sometimes outright garbage, when it comes from other racial groups' work. Take Japan and South Korea, for example. For every manga that becomes an international hit, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of manga with incoherent plots, weak characters, and recycled tropes that people still consume without hesitation. Yet when a black creator releases something experimental, niche, or imperfect, suddenly it has to be groundbreaking, flawless, and culturally revolutionary just to be considered worth checking out. That double standard is part of the reason so many black created stories never get the room to breathe, evolve, or grow an audience over time. Again, it's not all black people, but it's enough for me to notice. We can't address the gap of diversity if we do not support our own people when they step out and create something. And whether people like it or not, blackwashing established characters is not the solution people think it is. At best, it offers short-term gratification, a brief dopamine hit that fades the moment the novelty wears off. It doesn't build infrastructure, it doesn't create new worlds, and it certainly doesn't give black creators ownership over lasting intellectual property. Waiting around for massive corporations like DC or Marvel to suddenly do diversity right isn't the answer either. I understand the frustration, especially when you get attached to a character and realize they'll never receive the same level of attention, resources, or cultural importance as characters like Superman or Batman. But the uncomfortable reality is this: those companies own those characters. They can do whatever they want with them, for better or worse. If you genuinely want something new, something fresh, something different, you have to go out and find it. You can't rely on the mainstream to spoon-feed you originality. Now, I'm not saying you should blindly support anything just because a black person made it. That's not the point. The point is to browse with intention, to explore, to actually engage with stories and see which ones resonate with you on a personal, emotional, or intellectual level. That's how movements form. That's how ecosystems grow. With that being said, that's all I've got for today. I hope at least one of the works I shared sparked your interest or opened your mind to what's already out there. Let me know what you think in the comments, hit the like button, subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.